Robert Downey Jr. is an actual Wing Chun practitioner, and it shows in his last Sherlock Holmes film where he fights some thugs. Robert Downey Jr. has practiced Wing Chun Kung Fu for years. I think it's why Sherlock fights in that particular style. He moves well for it. The sheer arrogance! Robert Downey Jr. is actually very skilled at Wing Chun Kung Fu. And that's the style he uses in the film. Not Bartitsu. Greetings, traveler, I'm SnapJelly, and in my previous video I said that Robert Downey Jr. Can't actually fight, whilst I was unaware of the fact that he practices Wing Chun Kung Fu, apparently. Which honestly does not surprise me very much that he practices some form of martial arts, because a lot of actors do. You know, if you want to be an action hero of some sorts, it would be useful to know some form of martial arts, even if it's a movie version of martial arts, like a movie fight version, stage combat version of martial arts. So it doesn't surprise me, honestly. But I also said that in my previous video that Sherlock Holmes, the character portrayed by Robert Downey Jr., practices Bartitsu, which is quite clearly wrong, right? Because Robert Downey Jr. does Wing Chun Kung Fu, so there's no possible way that the character that he plays, the choreography made for the character that he plays is supposed to represent something else. Like what Sherlock Holmes did originally. Perhaps Bartitsu, but that's not true. It's clearly Wing Chun Kung Fu. So I would apologize for this, but I'm a YouTuber, and there's this disease that if YouTubers reach like past 100 subscribers, they become physically impossible to apologize or admit that they're wrong. So I went to the best source of intel on the internet, Wikipedia, for answers. List of films featuring Wing Chun. Sherlock Holmes. Robert Downey Jr. made use of Wing Chun along with sword and stick fighting techniques, as well as Bartitsu and Jiu-Jitsu notions to portray Sherlock Holmes. Well, stick fighting and jiu-jitsu are a part of Bartitsu, you fucking idiot. Alright, clearly Wikipedia is wrong, because Wikipedia says that he uses other things like jiu-jitsu and Bartitsu to portray Sherlock Holmes, which is not true, because he uses Wing Chun Kung Fu. I'm gonna prove it to you that he uses Wing Chun Kung Fu. Let me first explain to you, what is Bartitsu? In a way, you can see Bartitsu as the mixed martial arts of the 19th century. It was a mixture of boxing, jiu-jitsu, Japanese jiu-jitsu, stick fighting, and a French kind of kickboxing called savate. Savate. I don't know how you pronounce it, but I'm just gonna say savate for this video. But it doesn't matter how you pronounce it, because it's part of Bartitsu, and Sherlock Holmes doesn't do any of that. So, savate is quite an interesting one, because as far as I understand it, in French law at the time, it was illegal to punch somebody with your fist, so they needed a martial art that required a lot of open hand slaps, like savate. And that is clear proof that Sherlock Holmes does not do Bartitsu. There's no way that Sherlock Holmes does Bartitsu, because Sherlock Holmes does never do any open hand slaps. It is absolutely not the very first attack we ever see him do in the first movie. There are no slaps that Sherlock Holmes does, so it clearly cannot be Bartitsu, because, it must be something else, perhaps Wing Chun Kung Fu. Also, that stance that he does, like that, that is not like an old English style of boxing stance. That's not a bare-knuckle boxing stance. That is, in fact, people confuse that, but it's in fact a Wing Chun Kung Fu stance. Go to the Shaolin temples, you see everybody do that all the time. So it's clearly not part of Bartitsu, because there's some boxing in Bartitsu as well. It's clearly not that. It also wouldn't make sense for a British character like Sherlock Holmes to know a British kind of fighting, like a bare-knuckle boxing or Bartitsu. It would make way more sense for him to know Chinese fighting, right? Because, he's smart and stuff. Why would he know British combat if he's British? People would expect that. Sherlock Holmes is smarter than that. He needs something that people don't expect. Like Chinese martial arts. That makes sense. Like in the fight with the big guy, you see him put the big guy in an arm lock, sort of like a grappling thing. And of course, Wing Chun Kung Fu is incredibly famous for its grapples. None of that jujitsu bullshit, because jujitsu is of course a part of Bartitsu, but that is actually a myth. There's actually no grappling in jujitsu. Kung Fu has lots of it though, like Wing Chun Kung Fu, lots of grapples in there. Bartitsu has none. Absolutely no grapples. Also, you see him like use somebody's hat to block somebody's vision and punch him. That's also, it does not happen in Bartitsu. You see Watson subdue a guy by grabbing his coat, and they use a coat for distraction. Also, none of that happens in Bartitsu. In fact, English people at this time didn't even wear coats at all. In fact, it was the Chinese that did that because they were afraid of an invasion from the English. So they were like, we need a martial art that includes the British clothes, because that is something that the British would not expect. So that's how Wing Chun Kung Fu was born. Wing Chun actually means English hats and coats fighting. But jelly, like old English boxing, did not have any kicks in it, and we see Sherlock Holmes kick in that one fight. He does one kick, so it must clearly be something else besides boxing, besides bare knuckle boxing. Yeah, I agree. I absolutely agree. There was no kicking in bare knuckle boxing, right? And it's not like savate, for example, was popular for its inclusion of kicks. So it must clearly be something else. Perhaps Wing Chun Kung Fu. The kick in that fight is clear that Sherlock Holmes does not use Bartitsu. It's quite obvious. The evidence is there. Just saying. I have this little book, in case you guys are interested in... Where is it? Here it is. Okay. This book is called The Sherlock Holmes School of Self-Defense, The Manly Art of Bartitsu as Used Against Professor Moriarty. It's a very simple, very small little book. It's just very basic info. It doesn't go in much detail. And there's lots of pictures, so it's very easy to read. Like every page has a freaking picture displaying what is being used. Like it says what to do right here, and then right there it shows the pictures of how to do it. It's a very simple, straightforward little book to read. If you're interested, it was like 10 euros or something, very cheap. So if you guys want, give that a look. This book also very clearly shows, like by the front page here, you can already see it. And like a very large part of the book is actually stick fighting in a way, or cane fighting, right? So like that, you see various different usage of sticks and canes and all that, which it's quite clear that Sherlock Holmes does not do that. Sherlock Holmes does not know how to fight with a cane. In fact, I think that Sherlock Holmes, if he would use a cane, that he would actually accidentally hurt himself. So it's quite clear that Sherlock Holmes does not do Bartitsu. There's absolutely no way. Okay, I might as well include that. I was reading the introduction just now, which I didn't do. I always skip over the introduction. But I was reading it, and it's quite interesting. Here's what it says. When Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, this is the guy who wrote the first Sherlock Holmes book. Because Sherlock Holmes, the story is incredibly old, right? It's not, like the movies are not new, it's an old story filmed, right? So, when Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was obligated by popular demand to resurrect his famous detective Sherlock Holmes, whom he had consigned to the abyss of the Reichenbach Falls at the end of the final problem at 1894, there was the fight where he fell in the water with Moriarty. Like again, that is not a specific movie thing. That story was already written way before the movie happened. It was perhaps not surprising that he turned to the contemporary craze for martial arts to account for his hero's remarkable escape. We know from Dr. Watson that Holmes was an expert single-stick player, boxer and swordsman. Presumably saber, which is quite weird because single stick is like a practice tool for saber, but regardless. Nothing then could be more natural that he should also turn out to be proficient in Bartitsu, the Japanese system of wrestling, by which means he was able to prevail over his nemesis, Professor Moriarty, and reappear miraculously in the empty house in 1903. There's already a mistake here, because it says to be proficient in Bartitsu, the Japanese system of wrestling. Which is not true. Jiu-Jitsu is the Japanese system of wrestling. The guy who invented Bartitsu, his name was Barton Wright. his last name was Barton, right? He was an Englishman, and he spent 3 years in Japan, potentially learning jiu-jitsu. When he went back to England, he invented Bartitsu, and he included jiu-jitsu in that, and that's where the name comes from. It comes from jiu-jitsu, and his own last name, Barton, right? Bartitsu. It's an incredibly lame backstory, but you need a name somehow. So, yeah, jiu-jitsu, Japanese jiu-jitsu, is a part of Bartitsu, but, alright. It's clear to me because of the mistake that this book is not a reliable source. So, there's absolutely no way that Sherlock Holmes does Bartitsu like this book says. It is in fact Wing Chun Kung Fu, which makes way more sense. Wait, what did Sherlock call that punch?
With cross to left cheek.
A cross punch to left cheek? Did he say that? Cross punch? Well, that's quite convenient. You learn something every day. Apparently, in Wing Chun Kung Fu, they call like a punch with the right fist, like with the back fist to the face, they call it a cross punch, like they do in savate and boxing. But, you know, those are part of Bartitsu, which is not what Sherlock Holmes does. So, it's either a coincidence or like the Wing people, like the Chinese people that practice Wing Chun Kung Fu were just incredibly inclusive and multicultural. They were like, oh, we need the English people to know what we're doing, so we might as well give our attacks English names. That makes sense. I would also say, like a personal note, I think Bartitsu is a lot of fun to practice, but I feel like as a martial art today, it doesn't expect you to be faced with people that practice different kinds of martial arts. Like, it doesn't expect you to be faced with somebody that knows Kung Fu or Karate or something else like that. So I feel like Bartitsu, and this is just my personal opinion, right? But it works best against people that do a specific kind of fighting, like boxing, Old English boxing, for example, or other people that do Bartitsu. In today's martial arts world, it kind of falls short in many ways, in my opinion. It would still work great against like a very inexperienced fighter or somebody that just doesn't have any fighting experience. If you know Bartitsu, then you'll have the upper hand, clearly. But if your opponent, like if you're a master in Bartitsu and your opponent is a master in Karate or whatever, then you wouldn't have the greatest chance. I feel like that's my experience. But it is quite noticeable that Sherlock Holmes never ever seems to have trouble fighting against somebody that is proficient in a seemingly exotic martial art. Right, it absolutely does not happen at the conclusion of the first movie that he is faced with somebody who is clearly a better fighter in some sort of exotic martial art, and that he has to beg Irene to shoot his opponent because he's having trouble defeating him. So that does not happen at all. So it's quite clear to me that Sherlock Holmes does indeed do Wing Chun Kung Fu and does not do Bartitsu. It makes no sense for him to do an English martial art like that was invented by an Englishman while he's English. During the right time period, about-ish as well. It's not completely right, because Bartitsu was introduced, as it says here, in 1898, and Sherlock Holmes presumably died because of Moriarty, as it says here, in 1894. So the times are wrong. There you go. It's so clear. There's no possible way that Sherlock Holmes knows Bartitsu. Like, it also wouldn't make any sense, because it says right here that he knows single stick and boxing and all of that. All of those things you would say would translate quite well to something like Bartitsu, which also includes those things, but that's wrong. Right? If you have previous martial art experience, it is absolutely more difficult for you to learn a different martial art, because you already have those previous experiences stuck in your head. Right? There's no way that you could learn a potential martial art faster, especially if you're as smart as Sherlock Holmes, because if you're as smart as Sherlock Holmes, it just means that you're distracted more easily. Right, so there's no possible way that he could have learned Bartitsu. It's more likely that he traveled to China to practice with the Shaolin to learn fucking Wing Chun. The evidence is there. There's no way. Okay, I think I made my point by now. I'm done with this video. Alright, thank you for joining my quest, and hope you'll join me in the next one. Bye.